The story begins in San Francisco in the year 1981, and right away the movie warns us. This is based on a true story. And that is where we meet Chris Gardner, a man who wakes up early every day carrying on his back much more than it appears. Chris makes a living selling a medical device called a portable bone density scanner. In practice, a scanner that offers an image slightly denser than an X-ray. The problem is that it costs twice as much, and hospitals simply were not willing to pay for it. Every morning he takes his son, Christopher, a smart and full-of-life boy, to one of the cheapest daycares in Chinatown. Before leaving, Chris stops in front of the school wall and asks the janitor when he intends to erase the offensive word that was spray-painted there, but the janitor doesn't answer much. Then Chris looks at the daycare's motto and notices that the word happiness is misspelled. It is missing an I. While waiting for the bus with his scanner on his lap, a homeless man approaches, looks curiously at the equipment, and without hesitating asks if that is a time machine. Chris explains that it is not, but in the man's head it still is. He says he travels to the past with his machine. After that, the routine begins. Chris visits clinics, knocks on hospital doors, and tries to convince doctors that that device is worth every penny. And the answer is almost always the same: expensive and unnecessary. That day, with a full schedule, he needs to ask his wife Linda to pick up Christopher at daycare, even though she is already working 2 double shifts. The family's financial situation doesn't help. To pay the bank bills, rent, and daycare bills, Chris would need to sell at least 2 scanners a month, but he had gone a long time without selling even one. And every visit that ended with maybe next quarter was another month sinking. Always living in a hurry, he has the habit of parking in prohibited places in front of hospitals, which results in frequent fines. And since he has no money to pay them, his car ends up being towed regularly. That night, during dinner, macaroni and cheese that Christopher clearly doesn't like, Linda appears with a Rubik's Cube that she got from a friend named Cynthia, a toy that at that time was an absolute novelty. After dinner, she asks if he paid the overdue taxes. Chris answers that he will ask for another extension. Linda explains that it is already $650, that there will be interest, there will be fines, and she goes to work the night shift. After she leaves, Chris spends hours trying to solve the Rubik's Cube and discovers in practice that the challenge is much more difficult than it seems. The next day, walking down the street, he stops on the sidewalk when he sees a man get out of a red Ferrari. Curious, he goes up to him and asks directly what he does and how he does it. The stranger answers that he is a stockbroker. Chris thinks that requires a college degree, a postgraduate degree, years of study, but the man smiles and explains that it doesn't, that you just have to be good with numbers and with people. Simple as that. That 2-minute conversation changes something inside Chris. He looks at the people around him. Everyone seems happy, well-dressed in the right place, and he asks himself a question. Why couldn't I be like that? The next morning, he tells Linda that he intends to stop by a brokerage firm to ask about a job opening. When she finds out that he wants to become a stockbroker, her reaction is sarcastic. She asks if he wouldn't rather try to be an astronaut too. The words ignite another argument. He owes 2 months of rent. Next week, it will be 3. Linda has been working double shifts for 4 months, and he wants to change careers. Chris answers that everything he does is for the family, for her and for Christopher, and that he will succeed. Determined, he goes to the Dean Witter Reynolds brokerage to deliver his application in person. Before entering, he leaves the scanner in the care of a street singer on the sidewalk because he doesn't want to walk in carrying it. He offers her $1 to watch it and makes it clear that she won't be able to sell the device at all if she thinks about running away. Inside, he talks to Tim Brophy from the recruitment department, who explains that he receives applications by the dozen and that all he can do is help candidates fill out the forms before forwarding them to the responsible department. To reach Jay Twistle, the executive who supervised the internship program, Chris would have to go through a series of steps. It was at that moment that he saw the singer running away with the scanner. Without thinking twice, he grabs the form and runs out, but the girl manages to board a train that was already leaving, and Chris loses both her and the equipment. Later in bed, unable to sleep, he stares at the ceiling knowing that he had lost a device worth more than an entire month's work. The next morning, over breakfast, he watches a news report about the Rubik's Cube. A math professor managed to solve it in just 30 minutes, and Chris looks at the still scrambled cube on the table. Before he leaves, Linda asks him to come back without a scanner, without excuses, without stories. He promises that he will sell one that very day. On the way to daycare, father and son talk about the spelling mistake in the motto, and Christopher asks if it is spelled right in the graffiti on the wall. Chris confirms but explains that it is an adult word that shows anger and that he shouldn't use it. Arriving at the daycare, Chris discovers that the kids spend most of their time watching television, which annoys him. When he goes to the manager to question it, "Don't you have a filter?" she says that if he doesn't like it, he can look for another institution, provided he is willing to pay more. And she even reminds him in front of everyone that he usually pays late. After this argument, Chris goes to Dean Witter to personally hand his application form to Jay, but the conversation is too quick. Jay is full of appointments, and Chris can barely speak. Upon leaving the building, he spots the hippie girl and a friend carrying the stolen scanner. Furious, he runs after them until he jumps onto a departing bus. And that is when Chris's internal narration explains everything. He had invested all his savings in those devices, believing they would be revolutionary. Most doctors disagreed, and losing one would mean wasting an entire month, but he won't let it pass. After a chase that is not glamorous at all, Chris finally recovers the device. Sitting at a bus stop, Christopher reminds his father of the promise he had made, and Chris knows he is in trouble because now the problem has gotten bigger. He is carrying 2 scanners. Later, Linda notices not only did he not sell it, but he brought another one. Her disappointment surpasses her exhaustion, and after their son falls asleep, she reveals that she is at her limit. The arguments become increasingly frequent, heavier. Sometime later, Chris sees Jay trying to catch a taxi on the street. An opportunity. He approaches, mentions the application he delivered a month earlier, and when Jay tries to get rid of him, claiming that he is in a hurry, Chris invents on the spot that he is heading in the same direction and suggests sharing the ride. Jay reluctantly accepts. Inside the taxi, Chris tries to talk about his qualities, his experience in the Navy, where he worked with a doctor who played golf all day and left him in charge of the medical routine, saying that he is already used to making decisions alone. But Jay is completely focused on a Rubik's Cube and practically pays no attention. Noticing this, Chris offers to solve the cube. Jay says that no one can solve that thing easily, but hands it over anyway. And when Chris explains how the toy works, that it rotates around a pivot and the centerpieces remain stationary, he solves the cube before Jay's eyes, who watches every move fascinated, while even the taxi driver holds his breath. Jay jokes that they could drive around the city all day and Chris still wouldn't be able to do it. But when the taxi stops at its destination, the cube is completely solved. Impressed, Jay acknowledges his talent but runs off to his appointment, leaving the taxi bill for Chris to pay. The problem? Chris doesn't have enough money in his wallet. The taxi driver goes crazy. Chris runs across the entire park and dives into the subway station, betting that the taxi driver won't abandon his car for a few dollars. He manages to board a departing train, but the doors close, trapping the scanner. And with no alternative, he is forced to abandon the equipment. The same homeless man from before, the one who thought it was a time machine, was there and saw everything. That night, Chris calls Linda to apologize for not picking up Christopher, but she is furious. She says that she had to miss work because of him, and then warns that she and Christopher are leaving. When Chris returns home, he finds the apartment empty. Linda took their son, took everything. At that exact moment, the phone rings. It's Jay. He asks Chris to write down his secretary Janice's phone number to schedule an interview in 2 days. Chris desperately looks for a pen, but Linda took practically everything. Without finding one, he tries to memorize the number while running to a store to write it down. On the way, he runs into a friend who starts recounting the details of a basketball game. Scores, overtimes, points in the final seconds, all full of numbers. Desperate not to forget the phone number, Chris asks him to stop mentioning any numbers. The friend still demands a debt of 14, which is a number, and Chris manages to think. The next day, he meets Linda in front of the daycare, and she says that she is no longer happy by his side. Chris answers firmly that she can leave if she wants, but Christopher stays with him. That same day, he arrives early at the daycare and picks up his son before she even appears. At night, the landlord knocks on the door demanding overdue rent, and Chris promises to pay. The man suggests that he move to the Mission, a nearby hotel that costs half the price, and warns that he needs to leave the next morning because painters have been hired. Chris begs for more time and says that he will paint the apartment himself. Out of pity, the landlord grants a week as long as the painting is done. The next day, while painting the walls, someone knocks on the door. It is 2 police officers informing him that Chris needs to accompany them to the police station because of unpaid parking tickets. He explains that he already made the payment, but that the confirmation would only arrive the next morning, and until then, he is detained. Chris panics. He has an interview scheduled for the next day and needs to pick up Christopher. With no alternative, he calls Linda and asks her to stay with the boy for one night. She agrees, but warns that she will only return him later. Chris spends the entire night in jail. The next morning, as soon as he is released, he runs straight to the brokerage without time to change clothes, arriving in the same wrinkled and dirty clothes from the night before. When the secretary calls his name, he barely answers, so embarrassed by what he is wearing. He enters the room. The panel is waiting for him. Jay, Mr. Fraun, and other executives, and the surprise is evident on each of their faces. Chris then tries to invent elaborate excuses, sits down, breathes, and says that he stood outside for a long time coming up with a story that would demonstrate some admirable quality: seriousness, dedication, team spirit, but that he couldn't think of anything better than the truth. The truth is that he was arrested for unpaid parking tickets and that he ran from the police station to that office to arrive on time. Jay is asked how many times he had seen Chris and answers that he isn't sure, but more than he should have, seemingly confirming that the other times Chris was always in a suit and tie carrying a huge briefcase. One of the interviewers asks if he was first in his high school class, and Chris answers that yes, in high school in a small town with 12 students, but also said that he was first in his radar class in the Navy, where the class had 20. Over time, Chris's charisma and sincerity began to turn the tables. At a certain point, he manages to make the entire panel laugh. When asked what he would say about someone who showed up for an interview without a shirt, Chris calmly answers that the person would probably be wearing spectacular pants. The room relaxes. After the interview, Jay congratulates him behind the scenes for what he just did. But Chris, upon thanking him, reveals that he still needs to think about whether he will accept. And it was only at that moment that he discovered that the internship program pays no salary during its 6 months of duration. Jay almost falls off his chair and insists that he not take long to decide, saying that he will look like an idiot in front of his bosses if Chris refuses after all the pushing he did for him. On the way home, Chris does the math: 6 months without a salary. Only 1 out of 20 interns gets the permanent position at the end, and his only resources are the remaining scanners, which he needs to sell to survive during this period. But the decision was already made inside. He returns to the apartment to finish painting, and later, when Linda appears with the boy, Chris tries to talk. That night, after Christopher falls asleep, she says that she intends to move to New York. She has a job opportunity as a waitress in an acquaintance's restaurant. Chris accepts her decision but imposes a condition. Christopher stays with him. Linda looks at the apartment, at her sleeping son, at the man in front of her, and realizes that Chris is truly capable of taking care of the boy. She leaves crying, and that decision was going to cost dearly, for her and for him, each in their own way. After the door closes, Chris goes to the phone and leaves a message confirming that he accepts participating in the internship program. The next day, Chris and Christopher moved to the Mission Hotel a few blocks from the old apartment with the help of a friend who still owed him $14 and who accepted the job as a way to settle the debt. The room is small, the walls thin, but it's what they have. Since it's Saturday, Chris takes his son to play basketball before leaving to try to sell another device. During the game, Christopher excitedly says that he dreams of becoming a professional player. Chris reacts negatively, explaining that when he was young, he was never very good at sports and that his son probably has the same physical limitations as him, suggesting that the boy set more realistic goals. When he sees the sadness on Christopher's face, it immediately clicks. Then he stops, looks at his son, and says something that will mark the boy's life forever. He says that no one, absolutely no one, has the right to tell another person what they are or are not capable of doing, not even him. If Christopher has a dream, he must protect it, because when someone fails to achieve their own goals, they will try to convince others that they will also fail. But if he really wants something, he should go after it. Shortly after, the two visit a clinic to try to sell one of the devices, and this time the negotiation works. The hospital buys the scanner and hands Chris a check for a considerable amount. Relieved, he allows his son to buy a chocolate bar. The next day, the internship at Dean Witter officially begins. During the presentation, the supervisor explains the rules of the game to the new candidates with direct words. He says that they will need to do whatever is necessary to win clients, have lunch with them, have breakfast, even play babysitter if necessary. And the goal is to sell the company's services at any cost. He summarizes the logic like this: you catch the fish and we cook it. Besides passing the required exams, the interns will need to close the highest possible number of contracts. And the supervisor makes it clear that the previous year an intern scored 96.4 on the written test and was not chosen. To guarantee it, the recommendation is to get 100. Chris listens carefully, and in his head the logic is already running. It was simple, he just had to execute it. During the break on the first day, Chris runs into Mr. Fraun on the street, one of the senior executives of the brokerage. And it is at this moment that he spots in the hands of a homeless man one of the scanners he had previously lost. Without hesitating, he runs after the man, and the chase ends disastrously. He is hit by a car. The injuries are minor, but the impact knocks off one of his shoes, which disappears into the traffic. He looks everywhere, no one knows anything, and without finding another solution, he returns to the internship limping, wearing only one shoe. When Christopher sees his father arriving in that state when picking him up at daycare, he asks, "What happened?" And Chris explains that he was run over. His son, with all the seriousness of a child, says that he shouldn't run in the street because he could get hurt. Chris smiles and says that he will remember next time. And here begins the hardest sequence of the film. Chris's routine during the internship is exhausting. His supervisor constantly sent him to get coffee and donuts for the team, simple tasks that no one else had to do, and he feels underestimated, invisible. But the biggest problem is time. While all the other interns could work until 7 p.m., Chris had to leave at exactly 4 p.m. to catch the bus and pick up Christopher at daycare before it closed. That is, he had only 6 hours a day to produce what the others did in a full shift. Determined to compensate for the disadvantage, Chris develops his own methods to save time. Between one call and another, he doesn't hang up the phone to save precious minutes and avoids drinking water during the workday so as not to waste time in the bathroom. Every second counts. Even with all these efforts, after 2 months of work, he still hadn't reached the most important name on the list, Walter Ribben, the CEO of the company. Following the hierarchy would still take a lot of time, so he breaks protocol and calls Walter directly. And to his surprise, Walter answers. But even more surprisingly, he has a free slot in 20 minutes before going to a football game and accepts to see Chris briefly. Excited about the opportunity, Chris runs out, but his supervisor intercepts him in the hallway and demands that he park the company car properly before leaving. Chris tries to explain that he has an important meeting. The boss insists, and with no choice, he loses precious minutes trying to deal with the vehicle's defective lock. When he finally solves the problem, he takes the car, faces a traffic jam on the way, arrives at Walter's building, goes up, and discovers that he has already left. Upon returning to the car, he finds another parking ticket attached to the windshield. That night, sitting in a diner filling out a check to pay the fine, Chris thinks and then tells Christopher a plan. The next day, he will accompany his father to an important business meeting. The boy doesn't show much interest until Chris mentions the possibility of watching a football game. The boy asks if they are really going. Chris answers, and Christopher, with all the wisdom of a child, says that he knows exactly what maybe means that he probably isn't going anywhere. Chris smiles. The next morning, the two walk to Walter Ribben's mansion. Chris rings the bell, thanks him for the opportunity the day before, and invents an excuse to justify his absence. He says that he was visiting a friend who lives nearby and casually mentions that he and his son intended to watch the game that day. The plan works, and Walter invites them to his private box. During the game, to maintain the appearance of success, Chris hides the fact that he doesn't even have a car, and when someone suggests that he store some belongings in the vehicle, he quickly changes the subject. Walter admits that he likes Chris but says he is not yet ready to trust him with the management of his investment fund. Even without closing a deal that day, Chris uses the time to get close to Walter and meets several influential businessmen in the box. Contacts that will carry a lot of weight later on. Meanwhile, living in the motel remains tough. 4 months pass. During this period, Chris manages to sell all the remaining scanners, and the money is enough to support him until the end of the internship, or at least it should be. But the situation was far from over. When things finally seem to improve a little, the IRS freezes his bank account because of overdue taxes, and suddenly he is practically out of money. Desperate, he seeks out the friend who owed him $14, but the man answers that the debt was already settled when he helped Chris and Christopher move to the hotel. Chris argues that he only carried a few boxes for a few blocks. The friend refuses to return the money and shuts the door in his face. Later, while watching Christopher play in the playground, Chris spots the scanner he had lost on the subway again, in the hands of the same homeless man as before. He runs after him and recovers the device. The man despairs, truly believing that the equipment is a time machine, and begs Chris to return it, saying that he needs to go back to the past to watch a Jimi Hendrix concert. Chris ignores him and goes with his son to try to sell the device. Arriving at a clinic, he discovers that the scanner is broken. The doctors show interest but promise to buy it only after the equipment is fixed. And that was exactly where the game turned for the worse. That night, upon returning to the motel, they found all their belongings outside the room. The lock had been changed, and the manager wouldn't even listen. Exhausted, Christopher begins to cry. With no money for another room and nowhere to go, Chris tries the friend who owed him money. The man doesn't even open the door. With no alternatives, father and son walk through the city as the night closes in around them both. After hours wandering aimlessly, they end up arriving at a train station. Christopher looks at the scanner his father is carrying and comments that it is a real-time machine. Noticing how exhausted his son is, Chris plays along, pretends to press some buttons and states that the machine just transported them to the time of the dinosaurs. And Christopher immediately buys into the fantasy. Chris says that they need to find a cave to hide from the creatures, and the two run down the station corridor looking for shelter until they reach a public restroom. There in that restroom, Chris transforms the place into their cave. Christopher laughs, plays, and soon falls asleep on the floor using his backpack as a pillow. Chris remains awake. In silence, he holds his son with his arm, blocking the door whenever someone tries to open it from the outside during the night so that Christopher doesn't wake up scared. And there, with his son sleeping in his lap, he cries soundlessly without anyone seeing, tears falling in the face of the most difficult situation of his life. They were two homeless people, father and son, in a porcelain and tile cave. The next morning, Chris leaves the restroom carrying his inseparable briefcase, the same one as always, which now holds the little that is left of their lives. Upon arriving at work, Jay notices the suitcase and asks where he intends to travel. Chris invents on the spot that he is going to Sacramento to play golf with potential clients. Jay wishes him good luck and moves on. The lie is convincing, but the weight of reality doesn't disappear. Later, Chris and Christopher try to get shelter at a homeless support center, where they inform him that the place only accepts women and children. The employee carefully explains that Christopher can stay, but that Chris would have to look somewhere else. He refuses immediately, without a second thought. He has no intention of separating from his son under any circumstances. The two then receive the address of a shelter a few blocks away and run to get there before the deadline. From that moment on, facing lines at shelters becomes part of their daily routine. Every night, he fights for a spot to sleep, and Chris takes the briefcase everywhere, to work, to the line, to the shelter corridor, afraid of losing the few belongings he still has. When someone asks why he carries that around all the time, he invents a different excuse. He also learns to end conversations with clients faster than normal because he needs to be early to secure a place in line before the spots run out. And what no one there knew was that the worst was yet to come. One night, father and son attend a religious celebration at the place where they are staying. After that, Chris spends the early hours studying for the final internship exam with his son sleeping beside him. On the day of the exam, he finishes as quickly as possible to leave early and secure a spot in the shelter before the deadline. But leaving the brokerage, he runs into Mr. Fran on the sidewalk. The executive asks to borrow $5 to pay for a taxi, saying that he forgot his wallet in the office. Chris looks in his pocket, knows exactly how much he has, knows what those represent that night. Even so, he hands over the bill without hesitating. The bill was open and someone was going to pay. Because of this delay, Chris and Christopher arrive too late at the shelter that night, with no spots left and need to look for another place to sleep. Desperate to get some money, Chris makes an extreme decision. He sells blood. With the money received, he buys the necessary part to fix the broken scanner. And after searching a lot, he manages to get shelter at another location for that night. As always, he puts Christopher to sleep before starting to work on the equipment. It is at this moment that his son asks a question. Quietly, with a low voice, Christopher asks if his mother left because of him. Chris drops everything he is doing, turns to his son, looks him in the eyes, and immediately answers that that he should never think such a thing, that Linda's decision has absolutely nothing to do with him, that it never did. Comforted, Christopher responds simply, "You are a good dad." After the boy falls asleep, Chris finishes fixing the device. The next day, he manages to sell it, and the money is enough to guarantee a few weeks. Radiant, he picks up his son at daycare and tells him the news. That night, they slept in a real hotel. Christopher stops, looks at his father, and asks if they can't go back to the cave. Chris says that he hopes not, and his son asks why. Chris explains that there are things that are fun the first time but not so much the second, like buses. Christopher agrees, laughing. They spend the night in a comfortable hotel room watching television, enjoying a bit of the normalcy they hadn't had for so long. The next morning, father and son go to the beach, far from the buses, far from the noise, far from the constant pressure of the city, just the two of them with their feet in the sand. In his narration, Chris says that sometimes they passed illuminated houses at night, windows with light, voices inside, people laughing, and that he watched them in silence. Those images stayed with him. While all this was happening, Chris kept working, and the contacts he had made in Walter Ribbon's box during the football game began to bear fruit. He signs contracts with some of the businessmen he met there, real clients, real accounts. Finally, the last day of the internship arrives. Jay meets Chris in the company restroom and congratulates him on the work he has done, saying that regardless of the panel's final decision, his performance was extraordinary, and mentions the 31 accounts closed with Pacific Bell, a direct result of the work Chris built from the football contacts. Chris hears the kind words and gets even more nervous because it sounded like a polite goodbye. Shortly after, his supervisor calls him and takes him to the room where Mr. Fran is waiting for him. Noticing that Chris is wearing a new shirt, Fran compliments his appearance, and Chris answers that he chose that outfit to celebrate his last day of the internship. Fran smiles and says that he expects to see him wearing the same shirt the next day. Chris doesn't understand and asks the reason. It is then that Fran speaks calmly, looking straight at him, saying that that would be his first day if he wanted to work there as a broker. Silence. Chris tries to absorb what he just heard. Overcome with emotion, he fights to hold back tears. His voice catches and he thanks the panel for the opportunity, trying to maintain his composure. Fran asks with a slight smile if it was as easy as it looked. Chris replies quietly. Before leaving, Fran opens his drawer and returns the dollars he had borrowed days before. From that moment on, nothing would be the same. Chris leaves the building, walks the streets of San Francisco, and can't hide anything. The smile, the teary eyes, the lightness in his steps. In his narration, he explains that that phase of his life had a name. He called it happiness. Wasting no time, he goes straight to the daycare to pick up Christopher early. And when he finds his son, he hugs him with all the strength he has. There on the sidewalk, father and son stand still for a moment while the world continues to pass by around them, indifferent to what just happened. In the final moments of the film, the narration reveals what came next. Chris Gardner founded his own investment firm, Gardner Rich, in 1987, and the story ends showing father and son walking together through the city streets, talking and playing with knock-knock jokes and asking about how many planets are in the solar system. In a cameo appearance, the real Chris Gardner is shown walking past them on the street, a real man crossing paths with the cinematic version of himself. The epilogue informs that years later he sold a minority stake in his brokerage firm in a deal worth hundreds of millions of dollars, consolidating himself as a hugely successful businessman after having overcome one of the most difficult and inspiring journeys ever portrayed in cinema. This part of his life had a name. He called it happiness.